All right, let's dive into one of the most bizarre, most grotesque, and frankly, most unbelievable events in all of papal history. It's a story about political revenge that got so extreme, it literally reached beyond the grave. So, picture a courtroom, right? You've got your judge, your lawyers, and the defendant. But in this case, the defendant is a corpse, dug up from its grave almost 9 months after it was buried. And get this isn't some horror movie plot. This actually happened. I mean, just try to get that image in your head. Historical accounts tell us they took the decaying body of a former pope, dressed him up in all his magnificent robes, and propped him up on a throne to face his accusers. It's just a moment of pure macabre theater, and it's where our story begins. Okay, so what exactly was this thing? This was the Cadaver Synod, a church council that was called for one reason and one reason only: to put a dead man on trial. Let's break down who was who in this absolutely surreal drama. And the setup is just unbelievable. You've got the accuser, the living Pope, Stephen VI, literally screaming questions at the corpse of the guy who came before him. And to make it all seem sorta legal, they forced a poor young deacon to stand next to the body and answer on its behalf. Can you even imagine a more terrifying job? So you have to be asking, how on earth did things get this crazy? Well, to understand how something this insane could happen, we have to zoom out. This wasn't just some random act of madness. It was really the explosive finale to decades of political turmoil in 9th century Italy. See, Charlemagne's great empire was crumbling, and Italy basically became a free-for-all. All these powerful noble families were fighting for control, and the papacy, with all its influence and all its land, well, that was the ultimate prize. It was a really chaotic, violent, and deeply political time. And this is where the political chess game gets really personal. Pope Formosus, he had made a very powerful enemy in the Spoletan family. Why? Because he crowned their rival as Holy Roman Emperor. So you can bet that when Formosus died, the Spoletans made sure their guy, Stephen VI, became the next pope. And Stephen, well, he had one main mission: destroy the legacy of the man who came before him. So this brings us to the biggest question of all. Why? Why go to all this trouble for a dead guy? I mean, why not just denounce him and be done with it? Well, because this was about way more than just revenge. This was about rewriting history itself. You know, every political takedown needs some kind of legal reason, no matter how flimsy it is. And the main charge they leveled against Formosus was something called episcopal translation. Now, before he was Pope of Rome, he was the bishop of another city. And according to some church laws back then, a bishop was kind of seen as married to his post. So moving to another one was a big no-no. That was the technicality they were going to use to tear him down. And this just lays out the whole game, doesn't it? The official charges, perjury, breaking church law, that was all just a smokescreen. The real motive was purely political. See, if they could prove Formosus's papacy was illegitimate, then everything he ever did as pope, every priest he ordained, every law he passed, and most importantly, the emperor he crowned, all of it would be null and void. The Spoletans wanted to literally erase their rival's coronation from the history books. So with a living pope as the prosecutor and a dead man as the defendant, you can probably guess how this trial was going to end. But the verdict and what came after would send shockwaves through Rome and just lead to even more chaos. Yeah, big surprise, the court found the corpse of Pope Formosus guilty on all counts. A dead man was officially convicted, and the sentence was about to be carried out on what was left of his body. The punishment was just brutally symbolic. First, they ripped the papal robes right off his body, symbolically stripping him of his office even in death. Then, they took a knife and hacked off the 3 fingers on his right hand, the very fingers used to give blessings. And finally, they dragged his desecrated corpse through the streets of Rome and just dumped it into the Tiber River. You'd think that would be the end of it, but no. The people of Rome were absolutely horrified by this whole spectacle. And the public mood? It turned violently against Pope Stephen VI. The trial that was meant to secure the Spoletans' power had backfired big time, and it kicked off this dizzying cycle of revenge. Just look at how fast everything flipped. Within a year, Pope Stephen VI was thrown in prison and strangled to death. The next pope, John IX, immediately called a new meeting, declared Formosus innocent, and had the records of the Cadaver Synod burned. He even had Formosus's body, which had miraculously washed ashore, reburied with full honors. But then, just a few years later, in 904, Pope Sergius III, an old enemy of Formosus, he comes to power and reinstates the guilty verdict all over again. It was total papal whiplash. Okay, so why are we even talking about this bizarre 1100-year-old trial? Because the Cadaver Synod isn't just some weird historical footnote. It's this powerful symbol of a time when the line between sacred authority and just naked political power completely vanished. Historians have a name for this period, and it's perfect: the Saculum Obscurum, the Dark Age of the papacy. It was an era when the papacy was basically captured by warring noble families in Rome. Popes were put in power, kicked out, and even murdered, all based on who was winning the political game that week. The actual spiritual mission of the church? That took a serious backseat to raw, violent power grabs. When you boil it all down, what this trial shows us is a papacy being treated not as a holy office, but as a political weapon. And by invalidating everything Formosus did, his enemies created complete chaos. Priests and bishops all over Europe suddenly discovered their ordinations were worthless. Can you imagine being a regular person back then? How do you trust the confession you just made when the priest's authority might have been erased overnight? It was a massive, self-inflicted wound born of pure political hatred. The Cadaver Synod really stands as this chilling reminder of one of history's absolute darkest and strangest chapters. And it forces us to ask a question that's still relevant today. When the institutions we're supposed to see as sacred get tangled up in the ruthless hunt for power, what gets lost along the way? And in the end, who really wins?